She only meant to teach his daughter a song, until she recognized the woman in his photo, the same woman whose death had buried a secret from her past. As laughter returns to the mansion, so do the shadows. What if the man she's falling for is tied to the very pain she once escaped? Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The rain tapped lightly against the windshield as Emilia Vega gripped the steering wheel with one hand, squinting through the downpour at the iron gate rising before her. Her GPS chirped, "You've arrived," but the mansion looming ahead didn't look like any community center she'd ever seen. Her fingers hesitated above the gate buzzer. She had been told the tutoring gig was last minute, for a child in need. The woman on the phone had sounded frazzled, insistent, promising it was paid work for a charitable cause. Emilia, ever soft-hearted when it came to kids and music, hadn't thought twice. She packed her satchel with beginner piano books, threw on her raincoat and headed across town, only now realizing she was standing outside a multi-million-dollar estate in the wealthiest part of the city. She buzzed anyway. The gates opened with a groan. Emilia's old Corolla looked painfully out of place as it rolled up the cobblestone drive, dwarfed by luxury cars and trimmed hedges shaped like swans. The front door opened before she knocked. A tall man in a gray vest and tie stood in the threshold, arms crossed, expression unreadable. His hair was dark, streaked faintly with silver at the temples. His eyes, gray, sharp, assessing, landed on Emilia like a verdict. "You're the piano tutor." His voice was deep, measured. "I was told you needed someone last minute. I didn't realize it was a private residence," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He looked her up and down. Emilia suddenly became acutely aware of the raindrops clinging to her curls and the damp hem of her jeans. "Come in," he said finally, stepping aside. The foyer was grand. Marble floors stretched out beneath a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a museum. A grand staircase curved up toward the second floor like a sculpture carved from light and shadow. Emilia tried not to gawk. "I'm Daniel Wolfe," he said, his tone clipped. "My daughter Lily hasn't played since her mother passed. She was supposed to begin lessons today. The original teacher canceled." Her heart tightened at the mention of loss. But something in Daniel's expression warned her not to respond with pity. "Emilia Vega," she said gently, "and I'd be honored to meet her." He gestured down the hall. "Music room, she's shy. Don't push her." The room was stunning. A baby grand piano gleamed in the center, surrounded by tall windows that framed the storm outside. Sheet music sat untouched on the stand, dusty with disuse. Then a soft creak. A little girl peeked in from behind the curtain. Dark curls, pale skin, wide hazel eyes that shimmered like something long held in silence. Emilia crouched down, offering a small smile. "Hi there, I'm Emilia. I came to play music with you, if that's okay." Lily didn't speak, but she nodded, barely. Emilia sat at the piano, lifting the lid with care. Her fingers brushed the keys, and a melody flowed out, soft, gentle, like a lullaby on a rainy day. It wasn't flashy or technical, just kind. Lily stepped closer. She sat beside Emilia, watching intently. When Emilia offered her a place on the bench, she climbed up slowly. "Here, are you safe? You want to try one note?" Emilia asked, tapping middle C. Lily reached out and pressed the key. Daniel watched from the doorway, arms still crossed, but his posture had changed. A flicker of something, recognition, maybe grief, passed through his eyes. Leered and began to hum as she played. Daniel's breath caught. That melody, he knew it. His late wife had hummed it at night to their daughter. He hadn't heard it since the funeral. And yet this woman, this stranger, played it as if she had written it herself. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched as his daughter pressed another note and smiled, for the first time in weeks. The sound of that tiny smile echoed louder than thunder in the vast room. Emilia didn't speak. She knew not to. Music had done what words couldn't, bridged the distance between grief and curiosity, silence and hope. She slid into a simple duet, her left hand grounding a steady rhythm while her right invited Lily's fingers to dance. Lily followed, unsure at first, then more confidently. Her notes were halting, shy, but they existed. They mattered. Daniel leaned against the doorway, watching his daughter sit up straighter. It had been months since she had lifted her head like that, months since she had looked anyone in the eye, let alone smiled. "She's a natural," Emilia said softly, without turning around. She replied, "Before." Emilia nodded, her voice quiet. "Grief doesn't erase talent, it just buries it for a while." The room settled into a strange calm, the kind that felt sacred, like something broken was no longer shattering, only waiting to be gently pieced together. After the short session, Lily darted away without a word, but before she disappeared completely, she turned at the door and looked back at Emilia. Just one look, one silent thank you. Daniel walked her to the front door. "You weren't what I expected," he said finally. "Neither was this job," Emilia replied, smiling despite herself. He studied her. "How did you know that song?" "Take a seat," he said. "It just came out when I saw her." His jaw tightened slightly. It was her mother's lullaby. She made it up when Lily was a baby. I haven't heard it since. Emilia's brows drew together. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring up anything painful." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, you didn't bring up pain. You brought her back into the room." Emilia stood awkwardly on the marble step, raindrops misting around her like ghosts. "I wasn't planning to stay past today," she admitted. "I usually work with inner-city kids. This world, it's not really mine." Daniel's voice was almost a whisper. "Neither is it mine anymore." That surprised her. There was something hollow in his eyes, like a man who once lived in skyscrapers but now wandered empty hallways. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said before she could overthink it. "If Lily wants me to." Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he nodded once. A quiet thank you, the kind of gratitude that wasn't ready to be spoken aloud. Emilia turned and walked back into the rain. Her car was cold, the seat damp from her earlier drive, but her heart hummed with something she hadn't felt in months. Something about Lily reminded her of herself at 8, grieving, quiet, and desperately needing someone who didn't expect her to speak to be understood. And something about Daniel Wolfe, the guardedness in his voice, the way he stood like he was bracing for another storm, stirred questions she hadn't meant to ask. Back inside the mansion, Daniel stood in the hallway long after she left. He looked at the untouched sheet music still resting on the piano. He didn't touch it. Instead, he turned toward the second floor and paused before a door. He opened it to a small room lined with books and framed photos of his late wife, Caroline. One photo sat apart from the rest. A candid shot, Caroline playing the piano with Lily nestled beside her, grinning. Daniel sat down slowly. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't cry. He listened to the lingering silence and realized it no longer hurt quite as much. The following morning, Emilia returned to the estate with a sense of calm and curiosity she hadn't expected. The marble floors still gleamed, the air still smelled faintly of jasmine and polished wood, but something had shifted. It felt less like a fortress and more like a home on pause. Daniel was already waiting in the sunroom, standing beside a stack of papers on a glass table. He didn't greet her with pleasantries, just a nod and a gesture toward the chair across from him. "Drawn up a contract," he said. Emilia blinked. "A contract?" He slid it toward her. "You'll come 3 times a week, teach Lily at her pace, no press, no public disclosure, and you're compensated at a standard private tutor rate." She skimmed the pages, impressive legal language, non-disclosure terms that screamed control. But somewhere between the printed lines and Daniel's guarded expression, she heard something quieter. "I don't care about the money," she said, setting the papers down. "But if Lily ever wants to stop, you have to let her." Daniel hesitated, then nodded once. Agreed. I want her to choose the music, not me. Again, he nodded. Their handshake was brief but electric. Not romantic, just charged with the unspoken weight of something new. A pact between two people trying to repair a little girl's world. To the depressive and overwhelming sight. That day, Emilia brought in a set of colorful music books, each one playful and soft. Lily didn't speak, but when Emilia handed her a pink-covered book titled Butterfly Songs, the little girl's lips curved faintly. Emilia noticed the way her small fingers brushed the page, lingering. They began with simple notes, humming rather than singing, tapping rhythms on the bench when keys felt too loud. Slowly, day by day, Lily started to hum louder, to press the piano keys with firmer confidence. Still no words, but her eyes told a different story now. They followed Emilia, eager, trusting. Daniel rarely stayed in the room. He watched from the doorway or down the hallway, arms folded, his posture taut, but his gaze softening with each passing day. One evening, as the sun turned the sky golden, Emilia walked out of the music room to find him standing near the stairs. "You smiled today," she said. "I know," he replied quietly. They didn't say more. But that night, Daniel stood longer than usual outside Lily's room, listening as she softly hummed herself to sleep. Later that week, Emilia arrived early, hoping to find a metronome she'd left in the practice room. The housekeeper let her in, and as she wandered through the now familiar hallways, she paused near the far corner of the music room. A small cabinet stood half open. Curious, she stepped closer. Inside were old music sheets, dust-covered keepsakes, and a photograph. Framed in silver, aged around the edges, the image was unmistakable. Caroline Wolfe. Daniel's late wife? Emilia's breath caught. She knew that face. If from a magazine or article. From memory. From another life. She stared at the image, heart racing, the years folding back like an accordion. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps snapped her out of her thoughts. She carefully slid the photo back and turned around just as Daniel entered the room. "Forgot me," she began. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking past her toward the piano. There was silence, a beat, two. Then he spoke, quietly. She used to sit there every morning, playing Chopin with one hand and holding Lily's bottle with the other. Emilia tried to steady her voice. She had warmth in her eyes. Daniel nodded slowly. "She did, and you remind me of her sometimes." That shook her more than he realized. Because what she couldn't say, what she wasn't ready to explain, was that Caroline Wolfe had once saved Emilia from the darkest moment of her childhood. Bears. That night, Emilia couldn't sleep. She sat on her apartment floor, cross-legged, staring at the yellowed envelope tucked inside her old notebook. The name scribbled in elegant cursive read Caroline W. She hadn't looked at it in years. Inside were 3 letters, encouragement notes written to her when she was just 16, hiding in the corner of a music school's practice room, too scared to go home. Caroline had found her there, brought her tea, listened. She never pried, just offered kindness in a world that had none. And now, Emilia was in her house, teaching her daughter, facing her widower. The next few days at the Wolfe estate were a swirl of emotions. Lily had begun vocalizing simple phrases, quiet and breathy but real. Emilia gently celebrated each one, never pushing too hard. They played musical games, made silly rhythms with pots and wooden spoons. Lily giggled when Emilia pretended to fall off the bench in exaggerated shock. It wasn't just progress, it was life. Daniel noticed too. One afternoon, he brought in a tray with hot chocolate for them both. He rarely interrupted lessons. This time, he sat down across from Emilia, hands curled around his cup. "You're different," he said softly. Emilia raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a compliment, or a warning." He almost smiled. "Most people want something. Status, money. You don't flinch around silence. You wait for people to come forward." She stirred her drink. "Maybe I just know what it's like to be surrounded by noise and still feel unheard." A long silence passed between them. Then Daniel spoke, almost to himself. After Caroline passed, Lily stopped speaking. At first I thought it was grief. But now, I wonder if it was because I stopped listening. Emilia looked at him, not with pity, but understanding. Grief doesn't just steal people, it steals sound. She wanted to tell him then, about Caroline, about the connection, but something held her back. It wasn't the right moment. Not yet. Later, when Emilia packed her things, Lily tugged gently at her sleeve. "Miss Emilia?" Emilia turned, startled. It was the first time she'd heard her say her name so clearly. "Sweet girl." Lily pointed to the piano bench. "Will you play the butterfly song again?" Tears rushed to Emilia's eyes. "Of course I will." She sat down and played, Lily humming along, Daniel watching from the doorway, with something flickering in his eyes that hadn't been there in a long time. Hope. That night, after Emilia left, Daniel entered the music room alone. He opened the cabinet she'd looked in earlier and pulled out the photograph of Caroline. He stared at it, fingers brushing the frame. "She's healing us, isn't she?" he whispered. The next morning, Emilia arrived early again, this time with a wrapped gift. It was an old metronome, polished and painted by the kids at the community center. A gift from them to Lily. She found Daniel in the library, and for a brief second, she considered walking away. But then he looked up and gave a slight nod. Her tension rose suddenly. "I need to tell you," Emilia began. He raised an eyebrow. "I knew your wife," she said. "Before you did, probably. She helped me when I was younger. She didn't know my name, but she made me believe I was worth saving." Daniel's expression shifted. "She always had a way of finding the lost," he murmured. Emilia blinked back, the emotions swelling in her throat. "I think Lily has that same gift." Daniel looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "Maybe we all do," he said. And somewhere in the room, past pain settled beside present grace, and didn't feel so heavy anymore. It began like every other lesson. Lily sat beside Emilia on the polished bench, small fingers resting on ivory keys. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of the music room, making the space feel less like a mansion and more like a memory stitched together with warmth and wood grain. "Do you remember the chords from yesterday?" Emilia asked, gently, her voice like silk wrapped in patience. Lily nodded. Her fingers danced through the notes, tentative but precise. Emilia watched her closely, heart swelling at the progress this quiet child was making. Each note was a small act of courage. And then something strange happened. Lily hesitated, her hands paused on a familiar shape. She turned to Emilia with wide, searching eyes. "Can you sing it?" she whispered. Emilia froze. She hadn't sung in front of anyone in years, not since that day. Still, she drew a breath. The melody poured out, soft and trembling. "Hush now, little bird, fold your wings and rest. The sky will keep its stars for you, tucked inside its chest." Lily closed her eyes and hummed along, her voice light as wind on water. There was a sacredness in the moment, something ancient and untouched. But the spell shattered with the sudden creak of the door. Daniel stood at the threshold, still in his suit, briefcase in hand, completely still, the color drained from his face. His eyes locked onto Emilia like he'd seen a ghost. "Song," he said. "Where did you learn that song?" Emilia's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers slipped from the keys. "It's just a lullaby," she answered, carefully avoiding his gaze. Twist 5. "That was Caroline's lullaby," Daniel said, his voice almost a whisper. "She sang it to Lily every night. It's the only thing that soothed her after the funeral." Emilia's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Lily reached for her father's hand and tugged him closer. "Miss Emilia sings it like Mommy," she said softly. Daniel knelt beside her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I know, sweetheart," he whispered. Steel eyes, but his eyes never left Emilia. When the lesson ended, Emilia gathered her things with trembling hands. The echo of the lullaby haunted every corner of the house now. As she stepped out of the room, she brushed past Daniel, who gently touched her arm. "Where did you really learn that song?" he asked. Emilia met his gaze for a brief moment. "From someone who used to matter," she said quietly. "A long time ago." She walked away before he could say anything else. That night, back in her apartment, Emilia opened her old journal and began to write. "I don't know what I'm doing." The pen scratched across the page. "I promised myself I'd never go back. But Lily, she's so much like I was, and Daniel, he reminds me of the silence I used to fear. But now, it feels different. It's not emptiness, it's waiting." She closed the journal and stared at the ceiling, replaying the melody in her mind. The song had been a gift once, a secret between her and Caroline. Now, it was a thread tying her to a past she couldn't outrun, and a future she didn't know how to trust. The next morning, the house was different. There were fresh flowers in the entryway. A new painting hung on the staircase wall. Lily greeted Emilia with a smile and an actual sentence. "I want to show you my drawing." "And Daniel?" He watched her from the shadows of the study, his expression unreadable. Emilia was changing the house, whether she meant to or not, and maybe she was changing him too. That afternoon, Emilia sat by the garden window during Lily's sketching time. The child had taken to humming softly as she colored, and today her tune was unmistakable. It was the lullaby again. Emilia's gaze drifted to the hedges. She remembered playing in a garden like this when she was 10. It had been trimmed into neat squares with roses taller than her shoulders. That house had belonged to her mother's employer, no Daniel's father. It all came back in pieces. The mansion, the grand piano she'd been allowed to touch only when no one was home, the kindness of Caroline Wolfe, Daniel's wife, who once held her hand while listening to Emilia's little songs, whispering, "You have a gift." But the kindness hadn't lasted. There had been an argument one night, raised voices, and the next day her mother had lost her job. That's when Emilia learned some worlds were not meant for girls like her, not permanently. Lily reached up and handed Emilia a picture with long brown hair sitting at a piano beside a smaller figure with yellow pigtails. "You and me," Lily said. Emilia's throat tightened. She knelt down and pulled the little girl into her arms. "You're very special, Lily," she whispered. Behind them, Daniel lingered in the doorway, watching the scene with something soft in his eyes. That evening, Emilia stepped into the music room to find the piano lid open and a single white rose resting on the keys. There was a note beneath it. Ed, "To have loved you, Daniel." She held the note like it was glass. For a long moment, she stood frozen, unsure whether to feel honored or afraid. She set the rose down and began to play. Her fingers found the lullaby again, but this time, she sang it just for herself, for the girl who used to press her ear to the piano lid and dream, for the woman who still didn't know where she belonged. The next day, Daniel invited her to sit for coffee on the back terrace. The air was crisp, the sky blue and silent above them. "I owe you an apology," he said. She blinked. "How I first treated you," he said, eyes steady on hers. "I didn't mean to be cold. I was just—" Emilia nodded slowly. "I understand." He hesitated. "You knew Caroline, didn't you?" Emilia's breath caught. She looked down at her teacup, then back at him. She said, "When I was a child, she was kind to me when no one else was." Daniel's jaw tensed slightly, but he nodded. "She always was." They sat in silence for a moment, not awkward but full of things unspoken. "Your father," she started. "Let's knock," Daniel interrupted gently. "You don't owe me your past, and I won't ask for what you're not ready to give." That sentence undid her more than any confrontation would have. Later that week, Emilia brought a soft, worn book to Lily, a collection of lullabies from around the world. She pointed to a page halfway through. One, she said, was Caroline's favorite. Lily smiled. "Will you sing it again?" She nodded. As her voice filled the room, Daniel stood quietly in the hallway, hand resting on the wall, listening. The house didn't feel like a stranger's anymore, and neither did she. The invitation came not in a text or an email, but a letter, handwritten, folded neatly, and slipped under the music book Emilia had left in the practice room. Her name, Miss Emilia Vega, was carefully inked across the front. Inside, Daniel's handwriting was firm and precise. "You've done more for my daughter than anyone has in years. Join us for dinner this Friday. Nothing extravagant, just thank you." Emilia hesitated for a full day before replying. She wasn't used to dining in places where dessert spoons were polished and people used the word staff like punctuation. But she also knew Lily's voice, however soft, was a gift she hadn't expected to ever hear. So she said yes. The evening arrived faster than expected. Emilia stood before her mirror in a simple navy dress, hem brushing her knees, neckline modest. She tucked her hair back behind one ear, undecided about earrings, when a small knock tapped at her apartment door. It was Lily. The little girl held out a single pale bloom, the petals soft as a sigh. "Your hair," she whispered, "like Mom used to wear." Emilia knelt, her throat tight. "Thank you, sweetheart." Lily smiled, then reached up to gently place it just above Emilia's ear. At the estate, golden lights shimmered in the trees and soft classical music floated from the dining room. Emilia entered with slow, careful steps, clutching her small purse like a lifeline. Daniel met her at the entrance, wearing a navy suit that matched her dress by strange coincidence. He blinked once at the flower in her hair, then smiled. Small but real. "You look," his voice faltered, "perfect." The table was set with silver cutlery and hand-stitched napkins. There were only 6 guests, but each carried an air of old money and careful grooming. Emilia recognized none of them, though she sensed immediately who held power in the room. Introductions were made. She was Miss Vega, Lily's music tutor. That title felt like both shield and spotlight. The dinner began. Courses arrived in delicate portions: wild mushroom tart, roasted sea bass, something with fig reduction. Emilia did her best to follow conversation, but most of it revolved around stocks, board seats, and vacation homes on coasts she'd never visit. Still, she was content, until the man seated beside Daniel raised his wine glass and turned to her. "So, Daniel," he said, lips curling, "you always did have an eye for beauty, even when hiring help." The room went uncomfortably quiet. Forks paused mid-air. Emilia's face flushed with heat. She stood suddenly, her napkin falling to the floor. But before she could speak, Daniel rose with her. "Emilia isn't the help," he said, voice calm but steel-threaded. "She's the reason my daughter speaks again. She's the reason there's music in this house. She's also my guest, so if you can't show her respect, you can leave." The man blinked. No one moved. Daniel turned to Emilia. "Please, stay. I invited you for you." Emilia sat back down slowly, heart pounding. Later, when dessert was cleared and the guests dispersed to the garden, Daniel found her by the grand piano. "I'm sorry," he said. "That should never have happened." "You didn't let it," she replied. He nodded once. "I meant every word." Her voice softened. "So did I when I almost left." They shared a smile. Not perfect, but honest. As Daniel walked away to check on Lily, Emilia sat at the piano bench, running her fingers gently over the lid. She hadn't opened it before, always assuming it was locked. Tonight, it gave with a click. Inside, a faded envelope lay tucked beneath soft velvet lining. It was addressed in delicate script. "To Evie, for when you can't hear the song anymore." And beneath it, an old photo. Daniel, a younger woman with laughing eyes, Evie, and beside them, the man Emilia hadn't seen in years. Daniel's father. Her hands trembled. The past wasn't past at all. Emilia stared at the photograph, her breath catching. It wasn't just the shock of seeing Daniel's late wife, Evie, smiling, her eyes so filled with light and life. It was the man standing next to her. The older man in the background, slightly turned but unmistakable. Victor Wolfe. Emilia's heart pounded. She hadn't spoken his name aloud in years, but it still echoed in the darker corners of her memory. He was once her employer, her guardian of sorts, the man who had welcomed a teenage Emilia into his home under the guise of mentorship, then shattered everything. Her hands curled around the edges of the bench. The music room suddenly felt colder. She carefully tucked the letter back into place, her fingers trembling as she lowered the lid. Her throat tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of unraveling threads. What had begun as a mistaken tutoring job was no longer coincidence. The house, the piano, the people. She stepped back from the instrument, steadying herself against the polished wood. Later that evening, as the guests prepared to leave, Daniel reappeared at her side. "Did you enjoy the music room?" he asked gently. Emilia nodded, offering a quiet smile. "It's beautiful. It holds a lot of memories." He tilted his head slightly. "Some of them are painful." Her voice barely reached above a whisper. "Yes." Daniel watched her for a long moment, then said, "When Evie passed, I locked that bench. I couldn't bring myself to open it, not until Lily played again." Emilia looked up sharply. "To you earlier," he continued. "You opened it." She hesitated. "I shouldn't have. I'm sorry," he said softly. "I'm glad you did. Some letters need to be read." Emilia felt the ground shift beneath her. He didn't know the full truth, not yet, but somehow a part of him sensed there was more buried beneath her quiet eyes than she'd ever let on. He stepped closer. "I know my father wasn't a gentle man who left damage where there should have been guidance. I'm not him, Emilia." Her breath caught. "You knew?" "Suspected," he said. "There was a flicker in your eyes when you saw his portrait last week, and again tonight." She blinked back the sting in her eyes. "He hurt a lot of people." Daniel nodded slowly. "Including me, including Evie." Emilia looked at him then, not as a Wolfe heir or a guarded businessman, but as a man who had been grieving in silence and healing alongside his daughter. "I thought I was just passing through," she whispered. "But now it feels like I'm walking through echoes." Daniel gently took her hand. "Maybe some echoes are worth listening to. Maybe they're songs unfinished." Emilia didn't answer. She didn't need to. As she left that night, the photograph lingered in her thoughts, but so did the flower in her hair and the sound of Lily's laughter at dessert. Her past hadn't vanished, it had simply led her here. Back home, Emilia opened her journal, wrote one line, then closed the cover. The door opened. It didn't trap me. It freed me. The next morning, when she returned to the estate, Lily was waiting by the piano with a drawing in her hands. It showed 3 stick figures, her, Daniel, and Emilia, holding hands beneath musical notes and stars. "You made us a family," she said. Emilia knelt, holding her close. "You did, sweetheart, you really did." And from the shadow of the locked piano bench, something finally felt unlocked. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Wolfe estate, casting golden streaks across the marble floors. Emilia stood in the music room, her hands folded tightly in front of her, heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. Daniel walked in, surprised to see her so early. "Emilia," he said, setting his coffee down, "is everything all right?" She didn't answer at first. Her eyes swept over the piano, the drawing Lily had left behind, and the family photo still resting on the edge of the bench. When she finally turned to face him, her voice was low, steady, but trembling. "There's something you need to know." Daniel furrowed his brows, sensing the weight of what was coming. Emilia took a breath that trembled halfway through. "For your father?" The air seemed to thin. "I was 16, she continued. "A cleaning girl, quiet, grateful, naive. I thought I was lucky to be in a house like that." Daniel's face shifted. "You never mentioned—" "How the hell do you know that?" she cried. She cut in, not by him, but by the silence that followed after I reported him. Daniel stood still, like marble, his features frozen, as though each word Emilia spoke carved new fractures into his understanding of the man who raised him. "What happened?" he asked softly, though a part of him already feared the answer. "Cornered me," she said, her throat tight. "Said things, did things that weren't just inappropriate. I tried to tell someone, I begged his assistant, then one of the board members I cleaned for. But the next morning, I was fired, just like that." Daniel's jaw clenched, his eyes darkening. "No one told me," Emilia said bitterly, "because telling you would have meant scandal, and scandal wasn't part of the Wolfe legacy. So they erased me, and I let them. I went back to the community center. I played piano for broken kids, and I buried the part of me that used to believe the world would protect girls like me." Her voice cracked. "I told the truth, and I lost everything." The room fell into silence. Dick and suffocating, Daniel stepped forward, his voice shaking. "I had no idea. I swear to you, Emilia. Don't know what he did. My father, he kept so much hidden. The estate, the business. Even Evie tried to speak up once and he shut her down." Emilia's lips trembled. "But you're not him, right?" Daniel looked at her, wounded. "No." "Then why," she whispered, winking, "does this house still feel like his shadow?" Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't, because somewhere deep down, he had feared the same thing, that despite his best efforts, the walls still whispered his. "I care about Lily," Emilia said. "So much it hurts. But I can't stay in a place where the air still echoes with secrets." Daniel reached out. "Please, don't go. Don't let his past take more from both of us." But Emilia was already stepping back, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I need space, Daniel. Space to breathe. Space to remember who I am when I'm not just surviving." She turned and walked out of the room, the sound of her footsteps soft but final. And then, shattered. From the top of the staircase, Lily stood frozen, having dropped the framed picture she'd made of their little drawn family. Cracks spidered through the glass. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Just wide, silent eyes. Daniel ran to her, but Lily shook her head, turned, and fled back to her room. And the silence returned, not just in the house, but in Lily's voice. Lily hadn't spoken since Emilia left. The once bright home, filled with music and cautious hope, was now cloaked in a silence Daniel hadn't heard since Evie's funeral. Each morning, he knocked on Lily's door, softly, whispering gentle greetings. Each night, he left the light on in the hallway, just the way she liked. But she only stared at her sketchbook, unmoving, her crayons untouched. Daniel sat in the music room, replaying Emilia's words. He could still hear the ache in her voice, still see the pain she carried like armor. He had wanted to believe he was nothing like his father, but now he saw how silence, even inherited, could be just as damaging. He picked up the photo Emilia had found, the one of his father, himself, and Evie. He hadn't noticed until now the distance in Evie's smile, how her hand clutched her necklace like a lifeline, how he, young and blind with admiration, had stood beside the man who cast shadows, even in candlelight. Daniel stood abruptly. He went to his study and opened a locked drawer. Inside were letters, documents his father left behind, financial statements, personal notes, legal threats buried in confidential envelopes. Among them, a name, Emilia Vega. A memo, dated 13 years ago, dismissed without severance, no follow-up. He stared at it until his hands shook. Then he tore it apart, piece by piece, until the past lay shredded at his feet. Daniel returned to the music room and sat at the piano. He hadn't touched it in years, not since Evie passed. Not since the night Lily sobbed herself into silence, while he sat helpless outside her bedroom door. He played the first few notes of the lullaby, soft, hesitant. It cracked in places, broken like the memories they carried, but slowly he kept going. Lily appeared in the doorway, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. Her tiny feet tiptoed closer. His quick remonses were so small, he thought he imagined it. His hands froze on the keys. He looked up, heart thundering. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I want her back." Daniel rose, pulled her into his arms. "So do I, baby, so do I." At night, after Lily had fallen asleep holding her stuffed lion, Daniel stood in front of the window, staring at the rain tapping softly against the glass. He realized something vital. Apologies weren't just words, they were actions, choices, and he had to make one now before it was too late. The next morning, Emilia stood at the window of the community center, watching her students fumble through scales on the donated piano. Her chest felt hollow. Each note reminded her of Lily's shy smile, of the cautious way Daniel had started to soften. She missed them. But more than that, she missed the version of herself she had found inside that house. Brave, open, no longer just surviving. The receptionist approached her with a folded letter. "A man dropped this off for you, said it was important." Emilia opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note. "I see the shadow now. I'm tearing it down piece by piece. Not for me, for her. For you. If you ever come back, the bench by the piano will be unlocked. Your seat is still warm." No name, no signature, but she knew the handwriting, knew the weight behind every line. She folded the letter slowly, pressed it to her heart, and for the first time in years, didn't feel like she was running anymore. Outside, the sky began to clear, and in the distance, the echo of a lullaby whispered softly in her memory. The call came on a quiet morning. Emilia was watering the plants outside the community center when her phone buzzed. The voice on the other end was hesitant but familiar. "This is Maria Alvarez. I worked in the Wolfe estate 2 years before you. I heard what happened. I saw you in the paper." Emilia's breath caught. Maria continued, voice cracking. "I was too afraid to say anything back then. But if you're standing up now, I want to help." That afternoon, Emilia sat in a room with 3 other women, former staff who had once shared the same corridors, the same fear, the same silence. They swapped stories that had once stayed buried in whispers and glances. Now, those stories found names, dates, details. It wasn't just her anymore. The civil case against Thomas Wolfe, Daniel's father, gained momentum fast. A former driver stepped forward, then a personal chef, each with years of memories suppressed, now surfacing. When the official notice reached Daniel, he sat at his desk for a long time, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The name on the envelope still bore weight, his father's legacy, the empire that had raised him and shadowed his every success. But Daniel didn't hesitate. He made one call, to Emilia. "Here. I need you to know," he said softly. "I believe you. I always did. But now, I understand why. It was never just about believing. It's about standing beside you when it matters." Emilia said nothing for a moment. Her throat was tight. Then finally, "Thank you." Daniel didn't stop there. He issued a public statement through his company. "Silence is not strength, it is surrender, and I will not surrender to the shadows of my father's past. I choose to support the brave individuals coming forward, because the truth deserves light, not legacy." It was a headline the next day. News outlets swarmed the story, the son of power supporting victims against his own bloodline. But Daniel didn't flinch. He stood at the courthouse steps the morning of the hearing, surrounded by Emilia and the other witnesses. Lily clutched his hand, her fingers small but firm. The courtroom was packed. Thomas Wolfe sat with his attorneys, eyes cold, jaw set, in practiced indifference. But the room had changed. The years had changed. The silence no longer protected him. Maria spoke first, her voice steady, then the others. Each voice added a brick to the foundation Emilia had laid by coming forward. When Emilia approached the witness stand, her palms were sweaty, but her back was straight. She looked directly at Thomas. "As I was 19, she began. "I thought hard work would be enough. I didn't know how much one lie could cost. I told the truth. I was dismissed, and I lived for years thinking it was my fault." She paused, exhaled. Daniel's turn came. He stepped up, facing the judge and the public. "Father taught me many things," he began. "Discipline, precision, how to hide cracks beneath polished walls. But what he never taught me was courage. I learned that from the very people he tried to silence." His voice didn't waver. "I stand here not just as a son, but as a man who refuses to inherit silence. Because silence isn't strength, it's surrender, and I choose not to surrender. A murmur moved through the courtroom. The judge nodded, marking notes. The proceedings continued, but for Emilia, the moment had already cracked something open. A wall she didn't know she'd still been holding. Outside, reporters gathered, cameras flashing, but none of it mattered. Because on the courthouse steps, Lily tugged Emilia's sleeve. The little girl looked up, eyes wide, hopeful, and whispered, just loud enough to break the sky open. "You came back." Emilia crouched down in front of Lily, stunned. The last time she had heard that small voice, it was wrapped in song. But now, just 3 words, raw, vulnerable, brave, were enough to break something wide open inside her. Tears welled in her eyes. She smiled and brushed a strand of hair behind Lily's ear. "I did, sweet girl. I came back." Daniel watched from a few steps away, the weight of the moment written all over his face. The courtroom battle might continue for months, but this was the victory he hadn't even known he was fighting for. A child's voice, a woman's healing, and a future neither of them thought they'd reclaim. That evening, Emilia sat alone in the music room of Daniel's home. The same room where she had first played by mistake, the same room that had once held only silence and ghosts. Now, it held possibility. The piano's lid was lifted, her fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant at first. Then slowly she began to play, not one of the old songs, but something new. Unwritten. Searching, Daniel entered quietly, not wanting to intrude. But the moment her eyes met his, she didn't stop playing. She just nodded toward the chair beside her. He sat, listened, let the silence between notes say what they both hadn't found words for. "I read the rest of your journal," he said softly, after the final chord faded. Emilia looked down. "I shouldn't have left it out." "I'm glad you did." There was no judgment in his tone, only understanding. "You said you were afraid of repeating the past," he continued, "of trusting the wrong person again." She nodded. "When you've been betrayed by someone powerful, it's hard to believe anyone with power can be different. Understand that now," he said, "and I want to earn your trust, not with words, with time, with action." She didn't speak right away, but her fingers pressed the first notes of a melody again, gentle, forgiving, honest. The next morning, Emilia returned to the community center. Her co-workers embraced her, parents thanked her. A few children even clapped when she walked in, but it was Lily who surprised her most. Lily arrived with Daniel, holding a drawing. She handed it to Emilia with a shy smile. It was a picture of 3 people, Lily in the middle, holding hands, with Emilia and Daniel. Above them, music notes floated like, "We made it this morning," Daniel said quietly. "She calls it the family song." Emilia's heart trembled. Weeks passed, the trial pressed on, but Emilia no longer felt alone in the fight. Daniel appeared at every hearing. When the press asked why, he simply said, "Because telling the truth deserves a witness." The other women continued to come forward, their strength amplifying one another, and behind them all, Emilia stood, not broken, but rebuilt. One afternoon, Emilia found herself back in the music room, this time with Lily beside her at the keys. Daniel sat nearby, working but present, as always. "Do you think we'll always have hard days?" Lily asked quietly. She said, "Yes, sir," Emilia said, "but we'll also have music, and music knows how to hold the hard things." Daniel looked up, smiling faintly. And in that simple moment, in a room once haunted by silence, there was something new. Not just healing, hope. The late afternoon sun filtered through the branches, casting long shadows across the estate's garden. But it wasn't the same solemn, manicured garden Emilia remembered from her first visit. It had changed, grown softer, warmer. Worn stepping stones now curved through flower beds overflowing with color. Benches lined the pathway with open books etched into their backs, and at the far end stood a small, wooden trellis adorned with wind chimes that sang gently in the breeze. It wasn't just a garden anymore, it was a sanctuary. Emilia paused at the entrance, her breath catching as she took it in. Weeks had passed since the courthouse steps, since Lily whispered, "You came back," since Daniel's voice rang through that courtroom, not for his legacy, but for justice. Now, she stood once more on the grounds of the Wolfe estate, but this time, not as an employee, not as a teacher. She was simply a guest. Lily was the first to spot her. She raced down the path, arms wide, curls bouncing with each step. "You came," she squealed, launching into Emilia's arms. Emilia laughed, hugging her tightly. "Of course I did. How could I miss this?" Daniel approached from the other side of the garden, more casually dressed than she'd ever seen him. His sleeves rolled, a hint of soil still on his palms. There was a boyish light in his eyes, the kind that only surfaces when burdens have been laid down for a while. "Welcome back," he said. "And for a moment, I almost didn't recognize this place," Emilia replied. "It's beautiful." "It's for them," Daniel said, gesturing to a small group of children weaving between the flower beds. "Lily wanted to open the garden, so we created a corner for music, for reading, for joy." Her eyes landed on a stone circle near the center, where a low wooden platform had been built. A music stand sat beside it. Nearby, a bronze plaque read, "In memory of A.V. Wolfe. Where healing grows, let the music play on." Emilia's breath caught. "You turned it into something living." Daniel nodded. It's what she would have wanted. And it's what this place needed. Less silence, more sound. He reached behind the bench, retrieving a long, black velvet case and placing it gently in her hands. "He found this in a shop in Spain months ago," he said. "I didn't know why I bought it at the time, but I do now." Emilia slowly opened the case. Inside lay a pristine violin, the wood rich and warm, its strings gleaming. Etched into the side of the case were golden letters, E.V., her initials. Her hand trembled as she ran her fingers across the inscription. "It's beautiful." "A house needs your music," Daniel said softly. "And so do we." She looked at him, uncertain. "Are you asking me to come back?" He smiled. "No, I'm asking you to stay. However you choose to." A quiet settled between them, not the kind they used to fear, but the kind that asked no questions. That held peace. Lily tugged at her hand. "Will you play something?" "Please." Emilia glanced down at the violin, then back at Daniel and Lily. "All right," she whispered. "Let's see if I still remember how." She stepped onto the small platform as the children gathered around. The sun had begun to lower, casting a golden hue across the garden, catching the dust in the air like glitter. She placed the violin beneath her chin, closed her eyes, and let the bow glide across the strings. The melody was soft at first, tentative, exploratory, but soon it filled the garden like birdsong after rain. Lily began to twirl, her bare feet brushing the grass, laughter trailing behind her as she danced. Daniel didn't speak. He just watched, as grief gave way to something else entirely. Hope. As the final notes of the song faded into the warm evening air, Emilia lowered the violin. Her heart was beating faster, not from nerves, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. Lily ran up to her, cheeks flushed from dancing. "That was the prettiest song I've ever heard." Emilia crouched to meet her eyes. "It's not just the song, Lily. It's the person listening that makes it matter." Daniel approached quietly, holding 2 cups of lemonade. He offered one to Emilia, who accepted it with a small smile. They sipped in silence for a moment, watching the children begin a game of tag between the benches. "I used to think this house would never have music again," Daniel said, voice low. "After Evie, the silence became my way of surviving." Emilia turned toward him. "Survival and healing are different things." He nodded slowly. "You brought healing." Emilia didn't respond right away. Her fingers still tingled from the strings, and her thoughts felt tangled in the melody. "She still don't have all the answers," she admitted. "I don't know what this is, or what it should be." Daniel looked at her, not with expectation, but with understanding. "You don't have to, just stay, and we'll figure the rest out." She blinked, then smiled. Genuinely, not guarded. "You're not the man your father was," he said, "but I spent a long time afraid I was becoming him, until you showed me I had a choice." Lily returned then, holding a daisy crown in her hands. "Can I put this on you?" she asked Emilia, shyly. "Of course," Emilia said, kneeling again. As Lily placed the crown gently atop her head, Daniel chuckled softly. "It suits you. It's been a long time since I've been crowned with anything but doubts," she said playfully. Lily clapped and pointed toward the music bench. "Again, play another." Emilia laughed, but this time looked to Daniel. "Would you mind if I stayed a little longer tonight?" His answer was immediate. "You can stay as long as you want." Later that evening, after the children had left and the stars began to appear in the sky, Emilia found herself sitting beneath the trellis, the violin case by her side. Daniel sat a few feet away, elbows resting on his knees. "Did you mean it?" she asked suddenly. "Mean what?" "This house needs my music." He met her eyes. "I meant every word. Not just the music, Emilia. Your presence, your laughter, your truth." She turned toward the wind chimes, their gentle song weaving with the rustling of the garden. "It's still hard. The past, I mean." "No," he said. "I can't change what happened, but I can promise you'll never have to carry it alone again." They fell quiet once more, the silence full of stars and unspoken forgiveness. "Not promising forever," Emilia said finally. Daniel nodded. "I'm not asking for it." She glanced down at the violin case again. Her initials shimmered faintly in the moonlight. "I will stay," she whispered. He looked at her, something like relief softening the line of his shoulders. She repeated. "And tomorrow, maybe I'll write a new song." Daniel smiled. "Then I'll build you a music room." They laughed softly together, two people who had seen the worst of silence and were now learning the language of second chances. In the quiet night garden, where sorrow had once bloomed, hope was beginning to grow again. Not in declarations or grand promises, but in presence, in choice, in staying. 1 year later, the once silent hall, where grief had hung like a curtain, now shimmered with notes of hope. Emilia stood at the center of the brand-new music room of the EVV Center for Healing Through Music. Polished floors, sunlit walls, and rows of gently worn instruments donated by families across the city filled the space with warmth. The initials on the plaque outside. She glanced around the main hall, taking in the crowd gathering for the grand opening. Families, supporters, musicians, and therapists. All people who believed in the idea that music could be more than just art. It could be rescue, it could be rebirth. Daniel moved beside her, adjusting his tie. "Ready?" he asked softly. Emilia looked up at him. There was less tension in his jaw now, fewer shadows in his eyes. Time hadn't erased the grief, but it had rewritten the silence. "Really," she whispered with a nervous laugh, "but I'll sing anyway." Smile tugged at his lips, just like always. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Lily stepped onto the stage wearing a pale blue dress with music notes embroidered at the hem. Her curls bounced as she walked, and in her hands she carried her small violin. She looked toward Emilia, then Daniel, her eyes bright. A year ago, that little girl had barely whispered. Today, she was about to perform in front of over 100 people. The room held its breath as Lily took her place. Her fingers trembled for only a moment before she began. A soft, haunting melody floated from her bow, clear, tentative, then soaring. It wasn't perfect, but it was pure. Every note held courage. By the time she finished, Emilia's cheeks were wet with tears. Applause erupted. Lily bowed low and ran straight into Emilia's arms. "Did I do okay?" she asked, breathless. "You did more than okay," Emilia said, hugging her tightly. "You played from your heart. That's all anyone needs." Daniel came over, ruffling Lily's hair gently before pressing a kiss to her head. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather-bound book. "Open it," he said, handing it to Emilia. "Open it." Inside was a first edition copy of her lullaby collection. The cover read, Whispers and Light, Lullabies for Healing by Emilia Vega Wolfe. Her hand trembled as she traced her hyphenated name. She hadn't expected this. Not the name, not the life that had unfolded since she first stepped into his mansion, thinking she was just filling in for a no-show teacher. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Daniel replied. "You've already said it, in every song, in every lesson, in every choice to stay." They stood in the center of a room, once built on sorrow, but now resurrected with sound. Around them, music students laughed, guests mingled, and a soft piano tune played in the background. Emilia tucked the book close to her chest. "I never imagined I'd end up here." Daniel gently took her hand. "Neither did I. But here we are." Lily tugged at Emilia's sleeve. "Can we dance now?" Emilia nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, we can." And as they stepped onto the small stage once more, this time just to sway to the music together, Emilia knew she didn't need a grand finale. This was the new beginning. As the event wound down, the sun dipped lower behind the glass windows, casting a golden glow over the EVs. Emilia stepped away from the music room and into the quiet hallway that led to the back office. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor, but her mind echoed with a different rhythm. The journey, the people, the truth she had once feared to speak, now shaping the very foundation beneath her feet. On the office wall hung a new plaque, mounted with quiet reverence. It read, "To the unheard songs, and the voices that chose to sing anyway." Emilia's throat tightened. Those words hadn't come from her, they had come from Daniel. She remembered the moment she saw him writing them down, hands shaking slightly. The morning after, Lily had whispered again on the courthouse steps. He had looked at Emilia with the weight of generations behind his eyes and said, "Your courage made space for all of us." She turned away from the plaque and sat behind the modest desk, now hers. A stack of forms waited to be signed. Grants, class schedules, volunteer programs, but nestled at the top was a check. A donation, large, anonymous, addressed to a national support network for survivors of workplace abuse. Daniel's handwriting signed it, but he had left the name line blank. Emilia picked up a pen and wrote it herself. Emilia Vega Wolfe. Her heart skipped, not because of the name, but because of what it represented. Not ownership, not a marriage yet, but choice, healing, legacy, a shared future. As she walked back toward the main lobby, she passed one of the new practice rooms where a young girl tapped the keys of a small piano. The girl's mother sat nearby, smiling softly, tears glistening in her eyes. Emilia recognized that look. It was the look of a parent who had thought their child would never speak, never sing, never be seen. She gave the mother a small nod, an understanding that needed no words. "Miss Emilia," Lily called, rushing toward her with a colorful drawing in hand. "I made this." Emilia crouched down and took it gently. The sketch was messy but bursting with heart. It showed a big building labeled Music House, with 3 stick figures holding instruments, one with a violin, one with a microphone, and one with a piano. She smiled. "Is that me singing?" Lily nodded shyly. Daniel walked over, tucking one hand into his pocket, the other brushing lightly against Emilia's back. "For a room upstairs," he murmured. "For writing sessions?" Emilia arched a brow. "Is that what we're calling dates now?" He chuckled. "Well, if there happens to be wine and a candle or two, I won't object." She laughed, a sound that had taken her years to rediscover. "I'll bring the notebook." As they turned together to leave the music room behind for the night, the lights dimmed on their own schedule, set to a timer. But one light stayed on, the one above the inscription by the entrance, where every child, parent, and teacher would pass each day. It read, "Music rise and hearts rise twice." That had been Lily's idea. The girl who once whispered in shadows now sang in light. And so did Emilia. With her hand in Daniel's and the soft weight of her lullaby book against her chest, she stepped into the evening, no longer just the woman who survived the past. She was the one who rewrote it. A note, one name, one new beginning at a time.